So last week I surveyed you guys on Snapchat and found out that literally the majority of you are reading John Green novels right now, which is awesome. But other Snapchat surveys have revealed that far fewer of you understand the greatest sport in the world, aka soccer, aka football. So I wanted to make this video to help you understand the World Cup a little bit better. And I made this video with your help because last week I asked you to help me develop phrases that you can drop into casual conversation to impress your nerd fighter friends with both your combined knowledge of soccer and John Green literature. So what I'm gonna do is give you a hypothetical but common event that might happen while you and your friends are watching the World Cup, and then suggest an impressive sounding phrase, a John Green allusion or metaphor that you can drop, boom, and blow your friends' minds. And just so you know, this video will contain some mild spoilers about John Green novels. A very common but extremely annoying part of international soccer is when players fake an injury, sometimes known as diving. That's when they trip over and they start like holding their ankle like it's broken, but you know they're faking the injury. Now, if you see this happen during a game, some of the statements you could drop to your friends would be, that injury is more fake than Max the stripper pretending to be Dr. William Morse. That dive is more dishonest than when Monica said she would always love Isaac. That dive was more fake than when Pudge lied about smoking to the Eagle. At the end of each half in a FIFA World Cup game, the head referee adds a somewhat arbitrary amount of stoppage time, which he deems to be the correct number of minutes to make up for injuries that have taken place during that half. You might have noticed, for example, that when the US played Portugal this past weekend, Portugal's final goal occurred during stoppage time. But as a viewer, the amount of stoppage time assigned by the head referee often seems quite random and arbitrary. So you might say to your friends, this amount of stoppage time seems completely random. Kind of like the plots of John Green's zombie apocalypse novels, Zombie Corns, book number 1 and number 2, The War for Banks Island. Another somewhat confusing rule to viewers is offsides, which is a rule involving the fact that offensive players cannot run beyond a defensive player unless they have the ball. But even to hardcore soccer fans, the nuances of different situations involving this rule can be incredibly confusing. So if you hear your friends discussing offsides, you might say something like, these offside rules are about as confusing as Augustus Waters being asked to put his right foot on a colored dot while playing Twister with Tobin the Duke and the cheerleaders. Get it? Because he doesn't have a right foot? FIFA, the international governing body of the World Cup, is well known for being incredibly corrupt. So if you hear your friends talking about any of their many bribery scandals, some of the statements you might want to drop on them would be, if Alaska worked for FIFA, she would make so much money from bribes that she'd be able to buy real booze, not like that Strawberry Hill stuff. If the Colonel worked for FIFA, he'd make so much money from bribes that he could buy all of the homes in Alabama for his mom. If Isaac worked for FIFA, he'd make so much money from bribes that he'd be able to buy robot eyes with X-ray vision. If Tiny worked for FIFA, he'd make so much money from bribes that he'd be able to stage Tiny Dancer on Broadway. If Margot worked for FIFA, she'd have so much money from bribes that she'd be able to buy 150 bottles of Veet, 80 pounds of catfish, and more bottles of spray paint than one could count. If Radar worked for FIFA, he'd have so much money from bribes that his parents would be able to buy 1,000 more Black Santas. If Hassan worked for FIFA, he'd have so much money from bribes that he'd be able to buy every season of Judge Judy on Blu-ray. Now, unlike many sports where referees can review calls by looking at little TV screens, in soccer or football, when the ref makes a call, that's the end of it, even if the call turns out to obviously be wrong. So the calls that referees often make are controversial, and as a viewer, it can seem totally wrong. So here are some statements you might make if you see a ref make a bad call. That call was worse than when the Weekday Warriors decided to prank Alaska and the Colonel. That call was worse than Q's decision to drive into cows. That call was worse than Alaska's choice to drive under the influence. Too soon? That call was worse than Will Grayson's decision to get a fake ID and try to use it before confirming that all the information was correct. Now, when you're watching an exciting game in the World Cup, you might be impressed by a keeper/goalie's amazing ability to save a ball from certainly going into the corner of the net. So if you see a keeper make an amazing save, you might say something like, that was the best save I've seen since Will Grayson saved Will Grayson from Will Grayson. That's the best save I've seen since Alaska saved Pudge from being stuck in the labyrinth. That's the best save I've seen since Hassan stopped Colin from saying uninteresting things. That's the best save I've seen since Hazel saved Gus from fearing oblivion. That's the best save I've seen since Lindsay saved Colin from his obsession with the theorem of underlying Catherine probability. If a player commits a particularly egregious foul, the penalty will be called a penalty kick, which is where a player takes a kick towards the goal from an extremely short distance, and it is incredibly hard for the keeper to block such a goal. So if you see a penalty kick about to happen, you might make a statement about it such as, blocking a penalty kick is about as difficult as finding Margot in Orlando, as difficult as climbing the stairs in the Anne Frank house, as difficult as reading any John Green book without crying, as difficult as not making anagrams if you're Colin, as difficult as Will Grayson getting into a Neutral Milk Hotel concert with a fake ID that says he's 20. Frequently when you watch the World Cup, you will see shots on camera of fans from certain countries going absolutely crazy, and when you see such enthusiasm, you might say something like, the fans from that country are more enthusiastic than Ben and his beer sword, are more enthusiastic than Patrick is about being inside the literal heart of Jesus. Very talented soccer players are able to make a shot that spins through the air, bending around the keeper and then going into the goal. If you see such a shot off a corner kick or a direct kick or from far out, you might compliment the shot by saying something such as, forget bended like Beckham, that shot was bent like Peter Van Houten's mind. Forget bended like Beckham, that shot was bent like Colin's graphs. Bent like Augustus's trophies after Isaac gets done with them. Bent like Q's Van Fender. Occasionally a defensive player will try to deflect an incoming goal and end up scoring on his own goal. Now when that happens, oftentimes the people of that player's country are very upset at him. So after seeing such an event happen in the World Cup, you might say, the citizens of that country are going to be more angry at that player than Will Grayson when he gets mad at Mara for faking the existence of a certain other character. Hazel, after her first meeting with Van Houten. Margot, when she gets mad at Quentin for idealizing her as a manic pixie dream girl. When Pudge gets mad at himself for letting Alaska drive that night. Most of you watching this right now live in the United States, and so probably like me, you're rooting for Team USA, but unfortunately, spoiler alert, we're not really favored to win. So if your friends are talking about the chance of the United States winning, you might say something like, the chances of the US winning the World Cup in 2014 are lower than the chances of Colin not getting dumped by a girl named Catherine. Lower than the number of 17-year-old one-legged boys who are not virgins. If you watched the US game against Portugal on Sunday, you might have noticed that that game ended in a tie. Well, fortunately, after we move out of the first stage, which is called the group stage of the tournament, no games will end in ties. Instead, they'll move to overtime and then into penalty kicks. So after we're out of the group stage, you might say something about the fact that you are very happy that games no longer end in ties, such as, at least this game won't end in a tie, which would be about as unsatisfying as the ending of Paper Towns. Which would be about as unsatisfying as the end of An Imperial Affliction. Because as you've probably heard, that book ends right in the middle of a